Lore of the Old World, Ravening Hordes, Chapter 2, Orc and Goblin Tribes. Of the many races of the Old World, the Orcs and Goblins are one of the most bizarre and eclectic. The warriors available to a greenskin warlord are a mix of ferocity and unreliability. Many of them behave in unusual ways, and possibly more than any other army, their troops are both diverse and peculiar. As such, greenskin armies are both a challenge and a pleasure for their warlords to command in roughly equal measures. For an orc, there is no greater joy than to be in the thick of a battle, where the biggest and meanest warrior carries the day. Such belligerence is both a strength and a weakness, as it means orcs expend much of their energy fighting amongst themselves, rather than against a slightly more distant foe. Orcish skin is tougher than leather and curiously waxy. As an orc ages, its skin becomes gnarled and even more impenetrable, to the point where the most determined sword stroke can only cause a scratch. If the skin is pierced and the purplish red blood begins to flow, there is no guarantee that the wound will prevent the orc from pulverizing their opponent. Orcs are capable of healing at an incredible pace, and, quite naturally, take their robust bodies for granted, regarding everyone else as weak, fragile, and squishy. Smaller and more nimble than their orcish cousins, goblins have a more developed sense of self-preservation. They are cunning rather than strong, and tend to leave the serious business of fighting to the orcs. Goblins prefer to guard the rear of an army, though in desperate circumstances they'll finish off an enemy so long as it has been given a clobbering by a mob of orcs. Nevertheless, goblin raiding parties are rightly feared on the edges of more civilized lands. When they attack, goblins generally either have numbers on their side, or something larger and meaner giving them orders. Orcs and goblin tribes are led by a war boss. This is the biggest and loudest member of the tribe, and they are followed out of both respect and an understandable desire to avoid a pummeling for not following. A tribe's success is highly reliant upon just how hard their war boss can wallop things. War bosses rarely command great loyalty from their underlings, although a war boss may be admired for their ability to push an opponent's nose through their brain pan. Orcs and goblins are not sentimental creatures. They may remember a great leader, but they certainly won't mourn their loss. Upon the death of a war boss, leadership swiftly and inevitably falls to the next biggest and loudest orc in the immediate vicinity. A war boss will also inevitably face challenges from within their own ranks, especially at times when the enemies are in short supply and the fighting and looting has grown especially poor. For orcs, such challenges are typically direct and involve a large bladed or blunt implement, which can be a handy goblin in desperate circumstances. Being smaller and possessed of quite remarkable cowardice, the mantle of goblin warboss can be won in a direct challenge, but other methods are often preferred. It is not uncommon for goblin warbosses to sleep with their back against a wall to guard against the daggers of their enemies, and a wise goblin warboss will always insist one of their underlings take the first bite of any meal. It is unknown how many orc and goblin tribes exist, for they seem to crop up everywhere, making it hard to gauge their numbers. The more civilized races, men, elves and dwarfs for example, know that there are orc and goblin tribes beyond counting in the wild regions of the world, but whether these tribes merely drift through the lands in disorganized packs of unruly raiders, or mass in great numbers ahead of the next big waagh, is impossible to discern. A waagh is akin to a migrating invasion, when a mighty warboss riding high upon the waves of their success throws everything they have against their chosen enemy, and all the other orcs and goblins in the region flock to their banner. A waagh generates much fervour amidst orcs and goblins, and sweeps violently over everything in its path, irrevocably changing the landscape and laying bare great swathes of territory. Some waaghs travel a short distance before dispersing, others have crossed half the known world. Commonly, a waagh begins when a warband sweeps into a village, slaughters the defenders and charges on, pausing just long enough for the warboss to make a really big pile of severed heads upon which to sit and enjoy the cheering adulation of their mates. Should word of this glorious victory spread to other tribes in the vicinity, they will flock to the banner of the victorious warboss. This is partly because all orcs and goblins want to fight alongside a powerful warboss who has built a reputation for leading their tribes to victories, and partly because all they want to fight on the winning side, and mostly because no mob of orcs wants to miss a good scrap. Fortunately for the people of the Old World, most such orcish crusades of violence end rather quickly, often in a flurry of infighting, leaving only a few ruined villages and scattered armies in their wake. But not all invasions end quickly. The bigger and badder a war boss is, the easier it will be for them to maintain discipline amongst their followers and lead the squabbling tribes under their command to many victories, each more magnificent than the last, and causing such commotion that ever more tribes will flock from ever further afield to join the mighty commander. In this way, a small war can quickly become a large war, that if left unchecked will continue to attract tribes of orcs and goblins from many thousands of miles around, as it charts an utterly unpredictable zigzag course across the landscape until it becomes an epoch-defining event. The largest wars are the stuff of legend, and many times has the earth itself been shaken until it trembled beneath the tread of immense armies, gathered to march forth and destroy. The devastation wrought by such invasions blots the sun behind pools of smoke, covering great portions of the world in a shroud of darkness. The nature of the war means that the history of orcs and goblins as passed down by word of mouth through the tribes is rather fragmented. Greenskin history is generally an account of the rise and fall of huge wars, and their glorious leaders. Other campaigns involving the orcs and goblins do feature in the histories of other races, such as Sigmar's long wars that led to the Battle of Blackfire Pass, and the travails of Gilles le Breton in the forming of the realm of Bretagne. But the orcs make little to no effort to remember these, chiefly because they lost to the squishy Umis. Black orc bosses are huge and powerful brutes, possessed of a cunning intelligence not often exhibited by their kin. They are creatures singularly focused on war, an occupation they take extremely seriously. Where most orc bosses are given to wanton acts of bravado on the battlefield, charging into certain death to prove their courage to the orcs they command, black orc bosses are rigid in both discipline and adherence to their battle plans. As a result, they command the respect of orcs and goblins alike, and many orc tribes are led by a black orc boss and their cadre of brutal but cunning mates. Orc tribes are led by the biggest and brawniest of their kind, hulking brutes that have bashed their way to positions of authority above their peers. Such leaders among orcs are known as bosses by their underlings. The bigger and more powerful the boss, the more grandiose their title will be. Whilst a humble boss may lead a warrior band, a big boss will lead a tribe and get to boss around several smaller bosses. The biggest and bestest bosses, known as war bosses, will command the loyalty of several tribes. These mighty orcs get to boss everyone around, which is great. An orc shaman is a living conduit to the gods of their kind. Gork, famed for being brutal but cunning, and Mork, equally famed for being cunning but brutal. These strange creatures wield great magical power drawn not just from the winds of magic, but from the power of belief generated by their kin. As a result, shamans do whatever they can to increase the fervour of those around them, siphoning off this metaphysical energy. Consequently, orc shamans are strange individuals that prance and gesticulate wildly, gibbering and chanting. Whilst orcs enjoy such displays, many enemies find them extremely disconcerting. Where orcs determine tribal hierarchy by a simple method, biggest is best, goblins must pursue a less straightforward path to power. Amongst goblins, a devious mind is the best weapon. This is hardly surprising, as few goblins have the physical strength or skill at arms to command the respect of others, though there are certainly plenty of hard gits that do. Consequently, goblin chiefs tend to be sneaky individuals, capable of thinking up cunning plans and complex ruses to best their enemies, stacking the odds in their favour and ensuring their kind's physical weakness is never an obstacle to victory. Compared to the mighty magical prowess displayed by orc shamans, the powers of goblin shamans are weedy and irritating, or at least that's what the orc shamans tell other orcs. In truth, the magic wielded by a goblin shaman is no less destructive than that of their larger kin. Where they differ is as performers. Whilst orc shamans chant and gyrate around the battlefield, goblin shamans skulk close by their kin, working their spells and commanding their followers away from the eyes of the enemy. How this affects their magic is unclear, but goblin shamans certainly seem to live longer than their orc counterparts. The night goblin tribes that dwell in the deep caverns and abandoned dwarf strongholds found far beneath the World's Edge mountains are infamous across the Old World for being petty and cowardly creatures. In truth, night goblins are as vicious and cruel as any of their surface-dwelling kin, and their leaders are even more devious and audacious in their schemes. Often, night goblin bosses will lead their tribes in daring sneak attacks through hidden tunnels against dwarf holds, raiding ancient tombs for their treasures, and desecrating the tunnels and vaults in which the dwarfs make their homes. In this way, night goblin bosses keep alive the ancient enmity that exists between dwarfs and their kind. Under the watchful gaze of their shamans, night goblins cultivate many strange types of fungus. Some of these are used as food, but many more are grown for their hallucinogenic or intoxicating properties, or because they affect the goblin metabolism in some other way. Night goblin shamans prepare for battle by brewing potent fungus wines and beers which greatly enhance their magical prowess, or increase their confidence as spellcasters at least, if rendering them paranoid and twitchy at the same time. As they grow steadily more drunk, they sing loudly, so that their voices fill the tunnels of the World's Edge mountains and echo through the dwarf strongholds. A war boar is a huge beast, boasting a tough hide and wire-like pelt, stretched taut over prodigious muscles, mass, and topped off with huge tusks and a wicked temperament. In many ways, this description could be applied to the average orc, making it obvious why the two species are so compatible. Standing as tall as a pony, giant wolves are found all across the Old World, from the forests of the Empire to the open steppes of Kislev. Goblins prize giant wolves as mounts for their speed and ferocity. Giant wolves prize goblins as keepers and riders because they are plentiful and edible. Of the many foul creatures that reside within the forests of the Old World, amongst the most unpleasant to behold are gigantic spiders. These creatures are highly valued by goblins as mounts, both for their speed through even the densest of terrain and for their wickedly sharp and venomous fangs. All squigs are vicious mounts, as dangerous to their riders as to the enemy, but giant cave squigs are positively deadly. These monstrous balls of hatred are much stronger and heavier than their riders, and only the most courageous of night goblins will survive the process of mounting such a beast. Black orcs are the biggest, meanest, and strongest of all orcs, towering above their lesser kin. Many believe they get their name from their dark green hides, though in truth the name probably originates from their dark sense of humour. There is little a black orc finds more amusing than the misfortune of others, other than being the cause of that misfortune, of course. Few in number compared to their weedier kin, black orcs tend to group together into elite and disciplined warrior cadres that accompany only the toughest of war bosses to battle. In battle, orc boys, as orc warriors call themselves, form up into ragtag regiments that surge towards the enemy with great enthusiasm. These mobs fight with a wide array of weapons, from crude hand weapons and hefty throwing spears to surprisingly effective bows. For all their enthusiasm, orc mobs can lack discipline, often rushing uncontrollably towards the enemy, only to suddenly halt for a breather, directly in the path of an enemy charge. Yet what they lack in direction, orcs more than make up for in ferocity, for when combat is joined, an orc mob is a terrible foe. Individually, goblins are cowardly creatures, but the more goblins there are, the safer each individual feels, believing that harm is more likely to befall someone else. They also draw great pleasure from seeing one another maimed and killed in gruesome fashion, and the raucous laughter caused by such tragedy emboldens the survivors. Goblins are not skilled warriors, but by fighting in sufficiently large numbers they can overcome almost any enemy. Hiding amongst the ranks of goblin mobs, nasty skulkers are goblins particularly well versed in the art of stabbing an enemy in the back. When battle is joined, nasty skulkers will spring forth to strike at the unsuspecting enemy. Snotlings are diminutive creatures with pea-sized brains that infest orc and goblin encampments, scavenging, stealing and generally getting in the way. Yet their larger kin tolerate them, for they take the most mundane of tasks with boundless enthusiasm. In battle Snotling storms together in vast numbers, ignoring all danger as they rush towards the enemy. Long ago, goblin tribes ventured into the deep caves and caverns beneath the World's Edge mountains. Here they found vast underground realms to inhabit, and uncovered hidden ways into the lairs of the dwarfs, the better to make war upon their enemies. Over the centuries these goblins became distinct in type, and are now known as night goblins. Night goblins have become so accustomed to the dark that when they come out into the open they prefer to move around at night, and hide away during the day. Many of them wear long, ragged cloaks, dangling caps, and hooded coats that protect them from the loathed sunlight. Night goblin fanatics are crazed individuals that wield huge spiked metal balls attached to lengths of chain. Fueled by a potent mushroom brew, these insane creatures are unleashed from mobs of night goblins to wreak havoc upon the enemy. Cave squigs are improbable creatures with almost spherical bodies, dominated by huge mouths lined with jagged rows of teeth, above which perch snub noses and beady eyes. They move by means of hopping and bouncing upon a pair of muscular legs steered, for want of a better term, by thick tails. These brutish creatures are highly prized by night goblins, both as war beasts and for their meat, which is considered a delicacy. Cave squigs are herded together by brave night goblins, and goaded into battle with long, sharp sticks and clamorous music, the combination of which seems to rile them up very well indeed. Trolls are hulking creatures, whose hunched appearance belies their powerful nature. They can physically adapt to their environment. River trolls, for example, are bloated creatures with slimy hides and a terrible stench, who dwell along riverbanks and deep within swamps and marshes. Stone trolls, by contrast, are long-limbed brutes with stone-dry, cracked hides that can be found wandering the slopes and passes of the old world's many mountain ranges. Despite their many physical differences, all trolls are dim creatures, with indiscriminate appetites, and will eat anything from flesh and bone, to wood, rocks and even scrap metal. Not surprisingly, the stomach of a troll contains potent digestive juices, which trolls can vomit up onto their enemies. The warboar is an extremely tough beast that is notoriously bad-tempered, loudly flatulent, wholly dangerous, and wildly unpredictable, all qualities that orcs greatly admire, so it is only natural that orcs have adopted warboars as their mounts. Boars are slow to reach a full gallop, but once they do, they are almost unstoppable, their powerfully churning legs propelling them into the enemy, where their goring tusks and stamping hooves can do untold damage. From atop their precarious perch, an orc can set about the foe with spear and chopper, knowing that should they fall, their mount will give them a proper good kicking. Many goblin tribes can be found in the depths of wooded areas, and are especially concentrated in a wide forested belt south of the Empire, stretching the length of the border princes from Blackfire Pass in the east to Tilia in the west. These forests are full of all kinds of spiders, the largest of which are hunted and captured by goblins, who highly value them as mounts. Spiders are good fighters with mandibles like steel pincers, and, though not as fast as wolves or horses, are able to traverse even the most hazardous of terrain quickly, thanks to their many legs. Many goblin tribes are nomadic in nature, traversing the wildernesses of the Old World and the Badlands in huge ramshackle caravans. These nomadic goblins breed giant wolves as mounts, fast and agile hunters that can cover vast distances with ease. Roaming packs of wolf riders proceed ahead of these caravans, scouting out the land and pouncing upon any foe foolish enough to be caught alone in the wide open spaces. In battle, goblins use these mounts to great effect, encircling the enemy, wearing them down with arrows and launching lightning-quick attacks, then vanishing into the distance before even a single retaliatory blow can be struck. All squigs are naturally bouncy creatures, and the most bouncy and energetic are called bounder squigs by night goblins. Bounder squigs are highly prized as cavalry mounts, for not only are they vicious brutes with gigantic gobs lined with razor-sharp teeth, but they can literally bowl the enemy over with their bodies as they bound enthusiastically forward into the enemy lines. However, a bounder squig is a treacherous mount, and many a foolhardy goblin has met a sticky end trying to tame their mount, either crushed beneath its thrashing weight or pulverized against the roof of an underground cavern. By lashing together roughly hewn planks and bolting round-ish wheels to a sturdy axle, orcs can build formidable chariots. These bulky constructs are drawn by war boars, reluctantly goaded to motion by sharp prods. Suitably encouraged, a pair of war boars can heave even the heaviest chariot forward with remarkable speed, building up considerable momentum as they thunder forwards. Owning a chariot is a mark of prestige among orcs, and a chariot's crew are viewed with great envy by the more pedestrian comrades. Keen to make the most of their status in the eyes of others, orc charioteers will constantly mess with their vehicles, adding extra ornamentation and painting them in bold, flashy colours. Surprisingly well built from scavenged materials, goblin chariots are lightweight things built for speed rather than durability, the crews of which much prefer to race around the enemy, raining arrows upon them from afar, than to charge thunderously into melee. Drawn by fleet-footed giant wolves, goblin chariots race around the battlefield of the old world, sowing havoc in their wake. A pump wagon is little more than a ramshackle wooden hut on wheels. It moves under its own power, provided not by draft animals, but by the frantic efforts of snotlings. This drives a simple mechanism that keeps the pump wagon moving, crushing and piercing any foes unfortunate enough to fall beneath it. From a distance, a wyvern swooping and soaring between mountain peaks might be mistaken for a dragon. Up close there can be no such confusion. Where dragons are haughty and noble creatures, wyverns are filthy, foul-smelling beasts with jagged and dirty teeth protruding from their heavy jaws, making a wyvern the perfect mount for any orc that possesses enough brute force and ignorance to master one. As mounts, wyverns are well equipped for battle. Their pot-bellied bodies are protected by layers of fat and scaly, thick hides. Their gnarled feet and ragged wings are tipped with savage claws, and their long, lumpy tails end in venomous barbs. Of all the giant spiders that haunt the forests of the Old World, the largest and most terrible are the arachnarok. These hideous behemoths spin their vast webs in the deepest woods, preying upon the great beasts that dwell in these dark places. Goblin tribes view arachnarok spiders as god-like beings compared to lesser arachnids. Some goblin shamans have learned to subdue and control arachnarok spiders through use of magic and hypnotizing darts. Suitably satiated with tribute and lulled into a trance by the gyrating dance of a shaman, many arachnarok spiders awaken to find scaffolds and howdahs of wood and hide erected upon their backs, packed full of goblins eager for war. Only the most thoroughly unhinged night goblin would try to catch a cave squig, and only an absolute lunatic with little regard for life would dare chain together two great cave squigs, climb atop one, and then prod them with a pointed stick. Known as mangler squigs, these bounding balls of destruction can tear apart a battle line with brutal savagery. Alternately pulling, yanking, and dragging each other along, the two fettered great squigs hurtle forwards in great bounds. Upon landing, mangler squigs produce an impact that is nothing short of spectacular. The devastation such creatures produce makes them truly worthy of their name. Giants are large, lumbering brutes that wander the world seeking food and a fight. Most food puts up a fight. Giants, though quite rare, can be found in most parts of the Old World, and will often settle down for a time before moving on, leaving behind ravaged and flattened farms and villages. They prefer to live solitary lives, but can be coaxed to join an orc or goblin tribe. To most, a giant represents raw might and ruthless aggression, things that orcs and goblins value highly. For their part, giants are happy to hang around with orcs and goblins, as it significantly increases their chances of eating regularly and getting their hands on strong ale. Orcs greatly enjoy war machines for the sheer devastation they can create, yet seldom are they very interested in the work involved in loading and firing one. Consequently, orc war machines are built and crewed by goblins. Gigantic bows are easy to make from bits of wood and scrap metal, making them a popular weapon among goblins, yet for all their ramshackle appearance, a bolt thrower is still a deadly weapon. A giant catapult is a powerful but inaccurate weapon, so a projectile that can steer itself through the air is a great bonus. Indeed, so great is the prestige of soaring, however briefly, through the heavens, that there is never any shortage of goblins willing to don the leather wings and spiked helmet of the Doom Diver. Orcs were introduced to, and were most impressed by, stone throwers long ago by their enemies. Though the rough and ready rock lobbers built by orcs and goblins bear little resemblance to the war machines of other races, they work admirably, launching huge rocks through the air to come crashing down upon the distant enemy. Older, wiser orcs enjoy devastation every bit as much as their younger counterparts, but with age comes an appreciation of watching it from afar. For an orc bully, there is little better than seeing terrified goblins rush about obeying their orders and unleashing destruction upon the enemy. Orcs and goblins seldom create fine weapons or armour, preferring roughly made and unsubtle weapons which they instinctively know will cleave an enemy's head with ease, and thick, heavy plates of armour which they deem easily able to turn a blow aside. The items to which they ascribe religious or spiritual importance tend to be crude fetishes and roughly made effigies, artifacts that look the part but that rarely carry any true worth. Yet despite this, orcs and goblins possess many items which they believe to be potently magical, and this belief, fueled by the power of waagh magic, radiated by their kind, is often all it takes to transform a ragged, old banner, for example, into a powerful magical artifact.